Hey everybody, welcome to the Slick Tree Podcast. I'm your host, Colby Langford. The point of this show is to help improve ourselves as dogmen and to raise the quality of the dogs on the end of our lead. So let's settle in, turn the volume up, and let's see if we can't learn a trick or two together from our guests. I'm your host, Colby Langford, and you guys are listening to the Slick Tree Podcast. Today, I've got a friend of mine, Lane Williams. We're going to do a little interview, mostly about blood tracking dogs and his training process and his experiences with that. How are you doing today, Lane?
I'm doing good, man. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on. So, can we start out by let's just tell everybody a little bit about you, Lane. When you got into dogs and what all kinds of dogs you've messed with in your life.
All right. My name's Lane Williams. I'm 33 years old. I'm from Okfuskee County, and I've lived here pretty much my whole life. And I got my start in dogs with coon dogs. I coon hunted ever since I could keep up with my dad and my grandpa, and some even before that when they was packing me through the woods. But so I've been doing it pretty much my whole life. My grandpa was a coon hunter. My dad's a coon hunter. My dad's a canine handler now, a police officer, and been doing that for, I don't even know exactly how many years, probably close to 30 years. He trains canines and canine handlers. He teaches people how to be canine handlers and things like that. And so I've been around those types of dogs and done a lot of, he does tracking and narcotics detection, bite work, all that stuff. And I've learned a lot from him on that stuff. And I rodeoed in high school and college, and we had some cow dogs that we used for when we were practicing on bulls. We would send a dog in and kind of as a bullfighter to get the bulls off of us when we were practicing and things like that. I had one of them that I hauled around with me all the time. And so I've been around cow dogs and coon dogs and police dogs, and I've recently got into the tracking dogs, and now I have a terrier also. So I've been doing some of that in the last year or so. So I've been around a lot of different kinds of dogs, seen a lot of really great dogs, some that weren't worth their weight, but I've been around a long time.
Yeah, I'd seen where you'd been going hauling was it a Jag Terrier?
Yeah, she's a Jag Terrier or York Terrier, however you want to say it. It's a German imported Jack Russell, basically. But I've learned a lot from that little dog too. She's got so much heart and drive it's unbelievable how, you see something in one dog and you think that that's the measuring stick, and then you come across a different one and you're like, holy cow, this is a whole nother level of drive and heart. And I've had her just eat plumb up, and never back off. And I've got a little cur dog that I thought was pretty gritty. I've seen him take some pretty good licks and keep on going. And when I got her, it bumped my measuring stick up on that.
Yeah.
But we took her down to the terrier trials, and I went to Tyler, Texas, and we competed in that and got to see a lot of good dog work and meet some more dog people. And that's everything. I think anybody that, that dabbles in different lines of dogs or different, breeds of dogs or whatever, if you can pick something up from each one, that translates back to whatever you were originally doing, like if you're into tree dogs and you get a tracking dog, you can learn something from those tracking dogs that improve your tree dogs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's like, I know you've got some bird dogs too, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got a short hair and a wire hair right now, and I kind of use the wire hair more of a versatile. They're both versatile breeds, but the wire hair actually I've used her this year as a dove retrieving dog. I've used her in teal early duck goose season as a retriever, and then she's a pretty nice upland dog as well. I've thought about messing with her on. She just turned 2. I don't think I'm probably too late on if I were to try to start her on doing some tracking work. I don't think I've probably missed that window, but
no, I don't think you'd have any problem with her there. Well, they got good noses.
Yeah. The main thing we want to talk about today was I'm going to toot your own horn a little bit for you. Just we met through squirrel hunting, and I believe it was
Hmm.
UKC hunt that you'd put on was when I first met you, and then saw you at some more NSD hunts.
Yeah.
You seem to really have a handle on as far as just training in general, and you do a really nice job starting dogs. I've noticed.
I appreciate that.
I respect you a lot as far as that goes. I got to have the right kind of dog that falls into doing what they're supposed to do in order for them to turn into anything with me. It seems like. But I was wanting to hear kind of a breakdown of your training process for how you've started and trained the blood tracking dogs you've messed with.
Okay. I'll start off by saying training a tracking dog is pretty easy. I think it's a lot easier than like getting a dog to tree. For one, I mean when you're training the tracking dog, you can use the odor and you can lay the track yourself and you know exactly where it is. So everything's in your favor as far as training the dog. It's a controlled process versus turning a squirrel dog loose in the woods and you don't know where the squirrel was or where he
Mm-hmm.
went, and you're just hoping that the dog gets on a track, or if he does start barking on one, you don't know if it's a hot track or a fresh track, and you got to decipher all that stuff and try to praise him when he's right, and you don't really know if he's right or if he's wrong.
Yeah.
So it's a whole lot easier when you're training a tracking dog because you control everything. And the process that I use for training the tracking dog is the same process that police officers use to train canines to track people. I'm sure if you spent very much time with a pup in the woods, dogs know how to track naturally. You can, that squirrel dog pup can be run through the woods, and if you walk off and leave him, you can see him on your Garmin or dog trim. He'll hit your track and he'll track back to you and find you.
Mm-hmm.
So they naturally do that. They track each other when they're running loose. They'll track their mama if they're when they're pups, when they're running loose and things like that, and they'll learn how to track you. So they already know how to track. So you're basically just trying to teach them, to track something that you want them to track. And if they have any kind of drive about them at all, it's pretty easy. But what I do is I train to the tracking dogs or deer recovery dogs to track the interdigital gland. And what that is it's a scent that the deer have, and they produce a certain pheromone when they're wounded, but they have that interdigital gland scent. That's the way I've learned it is it's kind of like their fingerprint. It's individual or specific to each individual deer. That's how a buck can track a specific doe that's in estrus or whatever. And I like to translate it to how a coyote will track a wounded deer that's been shot or been hit by a car or whatever. They produce that pheromone when they're wounded. That's why when probably 90% of the tracks we go on are shot at a feeder in Oklahoma, and you'll go to that feeder and there's been 27 deer in that feeder within the last 24 hours, and that dog can pick out the one that's been wounded and push that track.
Mm-hmm.
When there's several tracks that's been at that feeder. So, and the way you do that, or the way I do it, and this way I do it, there's several ways to do it with anything you do, but the way I do it is I'll get deer feet or hooves from deer that have been wounded, and you don't want one that's been shot with a rifle and like dropped straight in its tracks, because they don't really have time to produce that pheromone that you want them to track.
Mm-hmm.
So you get deer feet from deer that have been bow shot is what I do. And you can do that a couple different ways. You can just talk to your buddies and let them give them to you. You can start collecting them off of the deer that you shoot yourself. You can also go to a deer processing plant and get them. And one piece of advice I'll give if you do that is don't just call your processor and tell them to set you some back, because they'll throw a whole bunch of them in a bucket and they'll all be cross-contaminated, and each one of them will have all the scent will be mingled together.
That makes sense.
And you don't want that. if you're going to do that, what I suggest doing is go park at the processor on a Saturday morning. And as those deer come in, ask the guys, if they would mind if you take the feet off of them, and then you put them in this Ziploc bag as you cut them off, and that way they're not cross-contaminated. And I have the tracking shoes. I don't know if you've seen those or not, but
I believe I've seen a video that you'd posted here a while back that you were using them.
yeah, there's a couple different kinds out there, and I'd have to look to see. I can't even remember the name of the website where I got them, but a guy sent them to me that he seen my TikTok channel, and I'd posted some videos, and I had a lot of people following, so he sent me a pair of those shoes, and I started using them. They're basically just a rubber sole that goes on the bottom of your shoe, and they have a cutout in the bottom of them where you can put a deer foot. And you can do that, but before, and it makes it handy because it gets your hands free when you are laying a track, And what I used to do before that was I would just zip tie or take a pair of pipe clamps, and I would clamp a deer foot to just like a broom handle, and I'd walk and lay a track like you were using like hiking sticks or something. But anyway, I use 2 at a time. So what I do when I collect feet off of deer is I'll take a hind leg and a front leg, and I'll package them together. And so you've got 4 feet, so that gives you two packages that you can do. I vacuum seal them and put them in the freezer like that. If you put, 2 of them in the shoes, or you can put 1 on each broom handle and walk with them. And that's how I lay my tracks. But to back up a little bit, once you've got your deer feet, and then another good thing to save is blood. And you don't really want to train your dog to track blood, but it makes it a little bit easier, and you can start off with a little bit of blood and kind of wean them off of it as you go. But it's not a bad idea to save some blood. A dog can smell a little bit of it, everything. It's not like, he's just tracking the interdigital gland. He can track that, and you want them to be keying in on that, but they're also going to smell hair and blood and anything else that's coming off of that deer as they're tracking. They're going to smell a little bit of all that. But so if you get your feet saved, get some blood, and then I'll save, some hide here and there, just little pieces. And I don't like doing drags. A drag is really easy for a dog to track. And I mean, you can do a drag when they're like puppies, just to build their drive and stuff. But when they get old enough to start tracking, and I like to start them, anywhere from 4 to 6 months, depending on their maturity level and stuff. And you can do little things with them, hide their toys and play tug with them and stuff like that to build that tracking in them. But like we talked about earlier, the dogs already know how to track, so you can increase that drive some when they're young. But a drag is too easy. Any dog can, if you drag a hide, they're gonna find it, or they should pretty quick. But sometimes I'll carry a hide with me, and just carrying a hide will, it's gonna be dropping scent as you're going, and it's not near as easy for them as if you're dragging it along the ground. And it's the same like as a deer. If a deer's running through the woods, they're going to be dropping scent, but their hair and stuff's going to brush against brush and sticks and things, but they're not just laying it on the ground, so easy. So sometimes I'll carry a hide with me, and this is all. So when you're training a tracking dog, I start out as easy as possible, and you'll lay a track. So we've already talked about all the stuff you'll need. Once you get all that stuff gathered up, the very first track that I'll lay will be a really short, straight line track. And I'll usually start with the wind in the dog's face. That's the easiest track you can go. And I'll go 50 yards or something like that. Just a real short, easy, straight line track. And I won't age it any at all. I'll run the dog on it while it's fresh. So I'll get my deer feed or my tracking shoes or whatever. And I'll start out with a little bit of blood. I usually put the blood in a syringe. If you'll blend it before you freeze it, it makes it a whole lot easier because it will clot, and then you won't be able to get it through a syringe. So if you blend it and then freeze it, it'll stay where you can take a big syringe and draw up, 2 or 3 cc's of blood, and you can make you like a hit site. I'll take that syringe and I'll squirt a little blood and just kind of simulate a hit site, because usually when you go to a track, somebody will say this is last blood, or this is where he was standing when I shot him, or whatever. And they'll usually have some kind of blood or something. And I'll do that. And then what I'll do is I'll start off this is like your very first track. I'll go 50 yards in a straight line with the wind hitting me in the face. And every step I'll put a drop of blood. And sometimes I'll carry a hide with me, and every now and then I might shake it just a little bit, have a few pieces of hair fall off of it or whatever. And then I'll take it to the end of the track. Different things drive dogs. Some dogs are driven by food. Some dogs are driven by, like my little terrier, she likes to play tug and chew on things and stuff. So I'll put a hide at the end of her track, and when she finds it, I'll, tease her with it, let her chew on it, and play tug with her and that kind of thing. That's kind of her reward. Tim, my mountain cur, food really drives him. So when I was starting off with him, I would put a little piece of canned dog feed at the hit site, and then I'd put like a piece in the middle of the track, and then I'd put the whole can at the end in a bowl, and that would be his reward. When he tracked all the way to the end, he'd get a canned dog feed. But that's individual. You just gotta find out what drives your dog. Some dogs, just petting them and loving on them, telling them good job drives them. Some of them, food can drive them or whatever, but you just kind of got to decide what drives them. So that's your first track, just easy, straight line. It's not aged, it's fresh. And then you continue doing that, and you make it a little bit harder. You keep it in a straight line, and the next time you do it, you might age it just a little bit and let them do it again with it a little bit aged. And then anytime you make it like you go to the next step, we always back up and make it easier. So if you get to where that dog can track a 4-hour-old straight line track, and now you're going to put a right-hand turn in it and see if he can pick up that turn, then you back up on your difficulty. So if he can track a 4-hour-old straight line and then you do a 90-degree turn, don't age it 4 hours. Back up and run that 90-degree turn on a fresh track, and then he ought to pick up that turn, because you're going backwards, and he'll pick up that turn, and then increase the difficulty level on that until he's getting that 90-degree turn at 4 hours. And then you might do a 90-degree turn and then put another turn, and got 2 turns in it, or age it even longer or whatever. But every time you go to a harder step, you always back up and make it easy for them, because you want them to succeed at that next step, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another thing, I said the wind at their face on the first track. That's going to be the easiest track for a dog, is when the wind's in his face. And you can do that same thing and put the wind at his back, and that's going to be harder for him. He's really going to have to put his nose down and actually track, versus when that wind's blowing in his face, he might smell that bowl of food or that hide or whatever you have at the end of the track. If the wind's at his face, he might smell that before you ever even put it on him, and he wants to go straight to it, and that's fine. But if he does that and he's, just burns that track up and goes straight to it, then you know that he's already past that. The next time you do it, put the wind at his back and bring him, run the track with the wind at your back when you lay it. So when you bring him back, he has to put his nose down and actually smell for it and track that scent. And then, but those are all things you want to do with them and make it harder and harder. And like the UBT1 certification is approximately like a 400-yard track that's aged like 4 hours, and that's pretty easy to get one to do, and it's pretty common. Most of your deer are going to be found within that mark. I mean, if you can get one to track a 4-hour-old track, 400 yards, you'll recover. That deer's ready to be, or that dog is ready to be taken to the woods and tested out on some deer. That's kind of the benchmark. Like once they get to where they'll do that, I'll start, taking some phone calls and taking them on tracks and stuff.
Speaking of like the UBT1, I believe is the test you just said. I'm not real up to speed on this, but I know that most states have their own specific blood tracker associations. Is that something that you're currently involved with, taking dogs through?
No, I am familiar with it, and I've talked to them and everything. And my dog, he can. I haven't taken him and had him certified only because I have so many calls already that if you go and you take that test, they'll put you on their list in Oklahoma, and they have a Facebook page, and you'll be on there all the time. But I have so many calls already that I have to turn down quite a few that I haven't never put my dog on there. But yes, you're correct. They do have. There's two of them in Oklahoma. There's the Oklahoma Blood Trackers Association, and then there's the United Blood Trackers Association. And I think that one's more of a nationwide type deal. I think they're pretty much everywhere. And I have been to, like, there's a deal that they do called Tracklahoma, and I've been to that, and you can learn a lot. They have, guest speakers, and they'll have guys that, talk about statistics and things like that. And you can learn a lot going to that. I definitely recommend, if anybody wants to go to that, you'll see it posted everywhere. But if you're in Oklahoma, you can go to the Oklahoma Blood Trackers Association Facebook page, and they'll have that stuff posted all over there with the dates and times and that type of thing. And if you get on there, you'll have people blowing your phone up all the time wanting you to track for them.
I can only imagine this time of year.
Oh yeah, I'm not even on it, and I could take a track every day. And it's just from which I have quite a few people that, that are, I post a lot of videos on TikTok and on Facebook and things of training and dogs and stuff. So a lot of people know that I have dogs and I have a tracking dog, and just word of mouth, they tag anybody they see that is looking for a dog, they'll tag me in it, and I could go on a track just about every day, and a lot of times, multiple times, especially during your busy times like youth weekend and opening weekend of muzzleloader. My phone just does not stop ringing during rifle season, and it'll be crazy the whole time through rifle season. I could go on 3 or 4 a day probably.
Have you started using your terrier yet on tracks, or are you still just using your Tim dog?
I'm using her some, and I'll take her and run her on the, if somebody calls me, I have people that'll call me, that are here local that have easy tracks, and I'll run her on those that, deer confirmed dead. And sometimes I'll run her on harder ones. Like if I run Tim on it and I find the deer or recover the deer, then I'll run her on it and let her, that way I kind of know the path that the deer went, and I can control, everything. And if she gets off of it. And so going back to the training process, the most important thing is knowing your dog. You've got to know when he's right, and you've got to know when he's wrong. And that's what makes it easy is if you're laying the tracks, when your dog's wrong and when your dog's right. And if you can watch their body language and learn, how they act and what they do when they're lost, or, if what they do when they're right is the most important thing to watch and to learn. And when you set that dog up and you know that there's a right turn coming, and more than likely, when I like to change that difficulty is when they start pushing it fast, because when they push it fast, they'll make mistakes. So if I get a dog that's, we've already laid a straight line track, he burned that one up, had the wind in his face. Then we went to the wind at their back, and they burned that one up too. And then now we aged it an hour, and he burned it up. And now I've aged it 4 hours, and he's burning it up. Now it's time to, I'm going to make him, I'm going to challenge him. So I'm going to put a turn in it or whatever. But like I said, we're going to back up. So I'll do a 90-degree turn, and I might I might go 100 yards before I do that 90-degree turn. And then I'll back it up to, if he was burning up that 4-hour-old track, I'll go to an hour-old track with a 90-degree turn. And what I'm watching for is what that dog does when he overruns that 90-degree turn, because he's going to overrun it. He's going to be burning it up because it's easy. It's an hour old, and he's already done a 4-hour-old track and succeeded. So he's going to be burning this 1-hour-old track up. And when it turns 90 degrees, he's going to overrun it. And I'm going to be watching his body language and what he does. And I'm not going to stop him and correct him and pull him back and show him where it's at. I'm just going to let him work through it. But I'm going to watch his body language and see what he does. So when I'm tracking a live deer and I don't know where the deer went, he's going to do the same thing when he gets lost or he gets off of it or the deer turned or the deer, backed up on his track or whatever it did. He's going to do that same body language, and you're going to know that he's off track. And if he continues to be off track for 100 yards and he never goes back to that good body language that you're looking for, then you'll take him back and start him over and let him try it again. And he might slow down and he might pick it up, where he didn't the first time. So that the most important thing about a tracking dog is knowing your dog. I mean, it's the same way with a squirrel dog or whatever, knowing when he's treed to call him or knowing when he's not sure. Some of my dogs, I can tell if they've got a squirrel treed or a coon treed just by the way they bark, and it's the same way with a tracking dog. And that's what Oklahoma's a on lead state. You have to track on lead. And I like that because you can learn a lot from that dog by watching them. If you just cut them loose with a tracking collar and you don't get to see everything they do. But on lead, you can see all that body language and their posture, and you can hear their changes in their nose when they're really smelling hard and trying to grub that track up. You can hear the difference in it and stuff when they're really working hard, and you can tell when they're burning it up and when they're struggling. And I mean, that's the most important part. So when you're laying those tracks for your dog, pay attention to what they do when they make mistakes, because that's what you want to learn. It's a team deal. I mean, there's good dogs out there that, you can just drop them on track and they can find a deer, but I think they're pretty rare. Most of your really good tracking teams are guys that have a good dog that's really trying hard, and they know that dog very well, and they know when to start him over. They know, certain kinds of tracks that he struggles with and ways they can set him up for failure. If they think a deer is in this hay field, if their dog's really good at winding, they might just walk the downwind side of it. If they tried tracking him and was unsuccessful, they might walk the downwind side of it and let that dog just pick up that scent of the dead deer out in the field. Because, a dog can wind a dead deer at, quarter of a mile sometimes.
I'd think a ruddy buck probably even farther.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just being generous with that. But, I mean, they can wind a dead deer for a long ways, if there's a good breeze going. And so that's one way that, you can, if your dog, is tracking and he's unsuccessful, you can always walk the downwind side of a block of timber that you think that deer went into and see if he can pick it up then, or you can, there's lots of different things you can do, but it's a team deal. The tracker, the handler, and the dog, put in equal parts, in my opinion.
I'm sure that every dog is different.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give us some examples of what are you looking for in the body language on the two dogs that you have, as far as when they have a loss compared to, is it kind of like, I know that with the bird dogs or even a squirrel dog, you can look at them and tell that one's acting birdy or squirrely, they just look like they're about to vibrate.
Yeah, so Tim, he's a mountain cur. He don't put his nose down very often. If he's putting his nose down and you can hear his nose popping and he sounds like, I don't know if, I've had beagles before too, but you can hear that nose popping on a beagle when they're really grinding out a rabbit track or whatever, and then they'll jump it up and they'll get it running and they pick their head up and they're usually barking and running hard. And then if they lose it, you'll see that nose go down and they'll go to just, spider webbing around, just combing every inch of it until you'll hear that nose popping. Well, Tim will do that if he's lost. If he's got his head up and his tail's wagging and he's really pulling on the lead and he's on it and he's burning it up, so to speak. And if he overruns it, a lot of times the first thing he'll do is his head will go down and he'll go to kind of milling back and forth and looking, and he'll usually circle back towards me and come back to where he lost the track, and then he'll pick it back up again. And that's a good exercise to do. So if he overruns it and he's coming back, now he's trying to cut a track. And what that means is like he's coming perpendicular to a track, and he's going to pick that track up and go either right-handed or left-handed. And that's a good exercise to do with a dog, is lay a track, and the wind can still be at your back where he's not going to, pick it up and shortcut it with the wind in his face. But, where where that track is and you walk that dog towards it, the wind's at his back so he can't smell it, and just watch what his body language is when he hits that track or when he cuts that track and turns. So when you're tracking, he's got his head up and he's moving fast and his tail's wagging, he's pulling, and then he loses it, puts his nose down, he's starting to kind of mill, then he comes backwards towards where you just came from. He'll cut that track and usually go right-handed or left-handed of where he missed it the first time. And you'll know what body language to look for when he cuts that track and makes a hard 90. You'll know that, all right, we're back on it again. And then he'll get to going. He'll be picking his head up, wagging his tail again, moving and pulling hard. And, you'll be able to tell. And then my terrier, she's still young, so she's getting better at it each time, but she'll put her nose down and she'll be back and forth and back and forth and back and forth all the time on a track. And she's not really a straight line. Sometimes she'll get on it and she'll really get to run that straight line, but she really goes back and forth on track a lot. And it's tough with her, because she's so little that I'm having trouble with her getting tangled on a lot of stuff, and she can't pull through them, where Tim can. I pretty much will let most of the line just drag behind him, and I'll move up and down the line as I can. As long as I don't get past the end where I lose connection with it, but I'll kind of just let the line run through my hand. Mm-hmm. And if he does get wrapped around something, I can kind of pull it on through and help him. But most of the time, he pulls right through everything on himself. And where the terrier, she can't. I mean, it can be a small little twig that if she wraps around it a couple times, she can't pull through it. So I'll have to pull through it for her and stuff. But I think I'm gonna, which I think I talked to you about this last night, but I think I'm gonna switch her down to like a weed eater line or something that she can pull through a lot better, and I'll just tie a loop in the end of it where I can hold on to it and try switching her over to that. But
yeah, I've heard of people doing a similar thing if they've got a dog that's real hard to catch, that's kind of wild. Mm-hmm. They'll just take a long length of weed eater cord and tie it to it. That way, at least they can, if they can get close enough to step on that cord, they can at least catch the dog.
Step on it and reel them in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's what I'm going to do with her, is switch her to, which I bought a different line from Line Country Supply, and it was a lot stiffer line. It's kind of like a heel rope. I don't know if you've ever had like a Lariat rope for heeling calves, but they're real stiff, and it's kind of like that type of material. And I thought, well, it won't really coil around things like that cotton lead does, and it works better than the other one. But I think it's still gonna be a little bit too much for her. 30 feet of line for an 18-pound dog is kind of a lot to pull anyway.
Yeah.
But you put it through a lot of different obstacles, and she can't hardly pull through it. And that's another thing that you need to teach in your process too, is like, my dogs are broke to lead, so I have a collar on them around their neck, and I clip with just a regular dog lead on them, and they don't pull on me. But I always track in a 5-point harness. And I've got, when I first start putting them on tracks, I'll put a little bit of resistance on that harness where they learn that it's okay to pull through that little bit of resistance, because you want them to know that it's okay to pull on it, because there'll be times when you're tracking and you get in a green briar patch or something and you have to stop, and you're going to have to stop that dog or pull on it, and you don't want them to be tracking, and when you stop them, they think they did something wrong. Mm-hmm. So they've got to be able to have that resistance and come to a stop, and then wait on you to get to cross a fence or to get through a green briar patch. Or sometimes I've had to get down on my hands and knees and crawl through some of these places these deer go, and the dog's really wanting to go, and you're having to hold them back. So when I start off with them on a lead, I'll put a little bit of resistance on them on purpose. Even if they're not going real fast and I can keep up plenty fine, I'll keep a steady little bit of resistance on that line just so that they know that they get used to having to pull through it. And they know the difference from when that lead's clipped to that 5-point harness, they can pull. And when that, a short lead's clipped to their collar, they can't pull. That's when they have to heel and stay at your side and not pull on you. And most of them, they pick it up pretty quick.
I've also, I know I've heard before that a lot of people like the harness even as soon as they start messing with them, training them on, just because it gets them to associate wearing the harness with that's what we're doing, especially like on a versatile breed that you're using for multiple things. Whenever you put that harness on, they automatically know that they're going into tracking.
Yep. Yeah, no, Tim, he's a squirrel dog too, and I can put just a Dogtra collar on him and turn free cast him, and he don't run deer or anything. When I put that tracking harness on him, like you said, he knows that's what we're doing. We're going to be on lead. And I try to keep them separate. Like always do, pick out a routine that you're going to do when you're squirrel hunting, and pick out a routine that you're going to do when you're tracking, and make them be different.
Mm-hmm.
Like I even let him ride in different spots in the truck. Like I've got just a regular dog box in the back of the truck that I put him in when we're going squirrel hunting. And I've got a crate that I keep in the back seat of the truck, and I put him in that when we're riding to go to a deer track. And sometimes I'll let him ride actually in the seat or in the front of the truck, but if he's muddy or raining or whatever, I'll put him in that crate. But he rides in the cab when we go to a deer track, and he rides in the back in the dog box when we're going squirrel hunting, just to keep everything different. And he's got the harness on when we're tracking. I'll clip the lead to his neck collar when we're walking, because sometimes you'll go out to a call for a deer and you'll show up with the homeowner, and he's got, or the landowner or whatever, whoever shot it. They'll have a side by side that you got to get in, and you ride out to wherever shot the deer, and then you got to walk 100 yards. And you don't want him pulling you the whole time you're doing all that. So I'll keep even though he's wearing the harness, I've got the lead clipped to his neck collar, and he heels at my side until we get there. And as soon as we get to the shot site, I take the lead collar off of him, clip it around my shoulder or whatever, and I take the 30-foot lead and I clip it to his harness. And that's when we transition to, now it's okay for you to pull on me,
mm-hmm.
And I don't ever put that on. As soon as we recover the deer, I take him off of that, and sometimes I'll just let him run loose back if we're walking back or whatever. I can tell him to heel and he'll follow me out, or I'll clip my walking lead on him and I'll lead him out. But I don't ever let him pull me on that harness unless we're on an active track.
Have you ever had him tree a squirrel walking back to the truck after a deer?
I haven't had him do it after, but I've had him do it on the way to a deer.
Have you?
I've had him tree squirrel on lead on an active track, and it's kind of, luckily, both times it's happened to me twice, and luckily both times that it happened, he recovered the deer. But it's kind of embarrassing at first when you're tracking, and we were on this deer track, and a lot of times, there's no blood on these tracks, because if there was blood, usually the people can find the deer. So a lot of times, they'll say, oh, we tracked him 300 yards and to a bed, and then after the bed there was no blood, or we couldn't find no blood. And I always tell them, take me to the first hit site so I can track that trail, and I can make sure he's kind of on the right direction. It's just kind of a warm up, to get him, make sure he's doing right. And sometimes he'll clean out, during that process, instead of putting him on the last spot they had blood, and then he's cleaning out during the track and all that stuff. So I usually try to start at first blood, but sometimes you're tracking and there's no blood, and you can feel the unsure of the whoever shot the deer. Like, they don't know if they trust your dog or not until you see a spot of blood or something, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, he is on it." But sometimes you don't see any, and when you're tracking and you don't see any blood, and then your dog makes a left-hand turn and starts barking trees, you're like, it's kind of they're like, "Oh my gosh, this dog has no idea what he's doing." And then I just say, "Hey, leave that alone. Find the deer, and I'll bring him back to where he was at, and he'll take back off." And both times he's found the deer, but it is it happens. I mean, it's hard for a dog that is a versatile dog. If you're walking him on a lead, tracking a deer that's a 4-hour-old track, and a hot squirrel runs up right in front of him, they're just dogs. They're gonna make mistakes just like anything else. Yeah, I can usually tell him, leave that alone and get back on this, and he'll go right back to doing what he was doing.
We mentioned tracking stats earlier. What all do you keep track of whenever it comes to tracking stats? What do people keep track of?
A lot of people, most of them, as far as statistics, will just keep track of their dog and how many they've been on, and people will try to, say, if all my dogs recovered, 75% of his tracks, and I did that at one point, but I've learned that it doesn't reflect anything to do with your dog, really, because it all depends on how good you are at deciphering the calls. I mean, because you get a lot of people that call of deer that they shot and it's not a fatal hit. And if you take every call that you get called on, and a lot of people will when they're have a new dog, they're trying to get experience under him, you can go on a lot of tracks that aren't fatal hit deer. And that's another reason why I'm not on the United Blood Tracker page or whatever. Most of the people that call me, since I'm only working by word of mouth, most of them I know them, or we have mutual friends or whatever, and I kind of know if they're good hunters or not, or
you
if
can
they
kind of screen them.
not to say that a new hunter can't kill a deer, but it's the success of your dog has a lot to do with the tracks that you take. I mean, and it's still not bad to keep statistics of that, and people will keep track of how many tracks they've been on, how many deer were recovered, how many deer were found alive or determined to still be alive by trail camera photos, or you jumped the deer up and he was still alive, or whatever. That's a successful track, even if the deer wasn't dead. If you tracked him and jumped him up and he was still alive, then that's a successful track, but they'll keep track of that. And then there's other guys that will also keep track of where deer were hit, how far they went, what kind of track, if they ran in a straight line, if they ran in a circle, or if they headed towards water, things like that. And most of those statistics have found that you've always heard people say, oh, they'll go towards water, or they don't run uphill, or they'll, if they run uphill, they're not wounded. I mean, there's a lot of theories and stuff out there, and most of those statistics have proved that none of that's real accurate.
Yeah.
Most of your fatal hit deer will run in a straight line, the path of least resistance, until they die, most of them. Now, if they're a deer that requires a follow-up shot or something like that, they're not fatally hit, or it's like a deer that's going to take quite some time to expire. Now, they might circle back towards their bedding area or wherever they feel safe, and they'll go towards that area and they'll bed down, and some of them will expire in their bed, or some of them will take, weeks to expire, and they'll try to go on about their normal life, and they might die through the winter from cold, or coyotes might get them, or infection might get them later, or whatever. But most of the deer that are fatally shot are just going to run in a straight line until they expire in the path of least resistance. And that's what most of the statistics will show. Now, some of the gut shot deer that'll get sick will go to water, but that's not real consistent either. It kind of just depends on if there's water close, or, some of them will be gut shot and they'll just go to cover and bed down. And if nothing messes with them, then they'll stay there until they expire. And some of them, get bumped. Coyotes is a big obstacle that tracking dogs will come across, because most of your deer are going to get, even if the hunters don't bump them, most of the time the coyotes are going to get them up, within an hour or so. If the people don't bump them, that happens quite a bit because there's just such a high population of coyotes around here, everywhere really.
Yeah. Would you say that you could read your dog? Like, I know that you said that if like they put out a certain pheromone whenever they are mortally wounded, would you say that you'd ever be able to tell if your dog thought the deer was alive on a track?
Yes, that's a good question. And I just went on a track. I went on 2 tracks the last 2 days, and we recovered one and we didn't recover the other. I was actually talking about that with the guy that shot the second one. It was the same deer camp we went to 2 days in a row, and there was 9 hunters in the camp, and they're from out of state, and we recovered one deer for them. And then the second day we went back, didn't recover a deer. The guy, the hunter, was along for both tracks, and he actually brought it up, which I'd already noticed it, but I didn't say anything. But he said he doesn't seem like he's interested in this track as much. And I said, well, yeah, it's kind of funny that you say that. I mean, I think sometimes he can tell if the deer's not fatally hit, and I don't know if it's that pheromone's not as strong, so he's not interested, or personally, I just think it's a track that he knows there's no reward to, so he's not as interested in it. He's more likely to be distracted on a squirrel or a armadillo or something than if the deer that has that strong pheromone that's wounded, that he knows he can recover. He seems like he's a little more interested. He's a lot more keyed up. He's a little more excited, And I've noticed that with him. The more tracks we go on, it's not that way. I think that's something they learn over time. They can tell, some of those deer that, and it depends too, like what you allow them to do. There's a lot of guys that, if you track off lead and you're allowed to bay live deer, that's a different story depending on where you are and what's legal. But like I know in Louisiana, they can run deer off lead, and I think they have 24 hours to recover a deer that's shot with a dog, at whatever means possible. So if you shoot it in the leg, and the dogs can go bay it, and you can go in and shoot it again. Those type of dogs might not care if it's one they're not going to recover, because you're not ever going to catch up to a deer like that tracking on lead. I mean, I've had them where you run them forever and they start clover leafing and coming back to the area you pushed them out of, and then you'll push them the other direction, and you'll go 3/4 of a mile, and they'll start circling back and come back through, and you'll start coming across fresh blood and stuff that you're on the right track and you're pushing this deer, but you're never going to catch up to him on lead. I mean, they're just, even if they're 3-legged, they're still faster than you are on lead, going through the brush and everything else. Where that's a deer that off lead, a dog would catch and bay, and you can go in and shoot it again. But the only way on lead you're going to recover them is if they expire, or if they're really close to. I've tracked up on them where they were still alive, but most of those deer that you track up on that are still alive, they're going to expire at some point. They just might not be quite there yet. You might be 5 hours after the shot, and at 6 or 8 hours they would have expired. I've tracked up on quite a few that were still alive, but those were going to die anyway. The ones that are hitting the leg, or they're hitting their back strapped or whatever, those deer, you're not going to catch them off lead. I mean, you're not going to catch them unless you are tracking off lead.
From your tracking experience, is there anything that's really stood out to you about deer in general that you've learned?
Not necessarily about deer. I mean, I have learned a lot about a dog's nose and the capabilities of them and stuff. I have seen deer do some crazy things, that like double back on their track and do stuff like that you wouldn't think that you would see. They do some crazy stuff sometimes, especially if they're alive and you're pushing them and they know they're being tracked. That's when they'll start doubling back and crossing over their track and doing things like that. But the most impressive things I've learned from tracking I talked about earlier, anything you do with a dog that's different than what you're used to, you can learn stuff that comes back to them. But just the capabilities of a nose of a like a cur dog, everybody says, like you would think a hound has a better nose, and I'm sure they do have a better nose. But like I've tracked 48-hour-old tracks with Tim and recovered them. I've watched him, grub a 48-hour-old track, and that's not something that you would think, a cur dog is capable of. You wouldn't want him to grub a 48-hour-old coon track or something like that. You'd
Mm-hmm.
want them. I've kind of made my opinion that it's not that they're not capable of doing it, is they just don't. They're smart enough to go past that and find something that's hotter. Most people will say that the cur dog only trees hot tracks, or you want them to only tree hot tracks, but that doesn't mean they don't have the nose capabilities. That just means they have enough brains to skip over that stuff that they don't need to be tracking and find something that's fresher or hotter, that's something that they can be successful and have fur in the tree. But they're definitely capable of grubbing a 48-hour-old track like you've seen an old your grandpa's blue tick do or something on a coon track. Like they're capable of doing that. They usually, most of them don't, and you wouldn't want them to, if you were, as far as tree dogs go. But when you train them to get on a scent and stay on it, and you practice at it, and they're definitely capable of doing it. It's impressive to see some of the stuff they can do. I mean, you're like, man, I don't know how in the world they did that. Before I probably would have said, ain't no way, but they can. I think a dog's nose is so good that we can't wrap our minds around or comprehend how exactly it works. Just because it's so much different than how we smell. Or
Lane, what advice would you have for somebody that makes a shot on a deer, blood runs out on them, they want to call in a dog? What advice would you have for somebody in that situation?
a lot of guys will tell you, as soon as you shoot a deer, if you're, just call a tracker, and I disagree with that. I think everybody should go to where they shot the deer and look and see if they can find blood and attempt to recover your deer. Now, I don't mean, grid search it if you can't find it, but go look. And because, some of the questions that a good tracker is going to ask you is, did you have blood? Did you find your arrow? If it's a archery deer, they're going to want to see pictures of the blood, things like that. So if you just shoot a deer and you didn't even get out of your stand, you're not going to know the answers to a lot of the questions. So I would recommend that you go to where you shot the deer and look for your arrow. If it's an archery deer, and see if you can find your arrow. If it's not an archery, just look for blood, look for hair, bone, things like that in the area that you shot the deer. And if you don't find that stuff, you might go in the direction that you saw the deer run for a short distance and see because sometimes, a deer will run 50 yards before they start bleeding. If you go 50 yards in the direction that you saw the deer, or you go in the direction that you last seen the deer and you don't see any blood and you're having trouble, then you can call a tracker and give them all the information that you have. So that's, the advice I'd give for one, that if they're not finding anything. Now, if you go down there and you find your arrow, you find blood, and you start tracking and it starts getting worse, I would say stop right there if it starts getting worse. Because usually if it starts getting worse, you're either pushing the deer, or you've already jumped him up, or he's starting to clod on you or whatever. And I would stop it. A blood trail should get progressively better if it's a fatally hit deer in the vital organs. It should get better as it goes, not worse. And if it starts getting worse, then I would back out. But the first, and another thing is to make sure you give them plenty of time. You don't want a deer that's jumped up is a whole lot less likely to be recovered than a deer that just beds down and has enough time to expire there. But things to make note of when you shoot one is which direction they were facing, where you think you hit them at, if they were quartering to or quartering away or broadside. If you can recover your arrow, that's a big, big help to a tracker. The blood that's on it. how much penetration you had, things of that nature are all questions they're going to ask. Probably what type of broadhead you're shooting, things of that nature.
Do you put much stock in what the deer's tail does after the shot? As far as
No,
if it runs with its tail up, tail down, it stops, it flicks its tail or not, that kind of stuff.
no, I mean, and a lot of that comes from experience, not from just tracking deer, but from hunting deer too. I mean, I've shot deer that ran hard with, mule kicked and ran hard with their tail down. I've shot deer that, if they flag and they're just kind of running off with their tail up, a lot of times you might have completely missed them. But I've had deer that were gut shot or something like that that'll kind of flicker their tail and they're hurt and they just ease off. And sometimes they'll do that, but it's hard to judge anything on like that with any kind of consistency at all. I mean, most of that stuff is just, I mean, I've had people tell me that the deer blew, and I used to think that, well, if he blew at you, you probably missed him or didn't hit him good or whatever, but then I've recovered some of those deer too. So it's hard to say. Now, I mean, if you take out both lungs on a deer, I doubt he's going to blow at you. But, if you shoot him in the hind quarter and clip an artery, he might blow as soon as you hit him, and he don't know that he's hurt near as bad as he is. And 75 yards later, he's piled up because you clipped a big artery in his leg, So you never know what could happen to them and how they're going to react to it. And there are, some of them things will translate, but most of it's inconsistent on how it goes,
So I'm sure that every tracking team operates differently in this manner, but could you kind of give us a rundown of what somebody that was calling a tracker in should be expected on, like what's fair compensation for coming and running the track, fined, not fined? Just could you speak on that a little bit for us?
I would say, like you said, it depends on each person and what their expenses are and things like that. But I figure I usually take tracks that are within an hour of my house, and if you account for what the cost of fuel is, and driving an hour one direction and then back, and then you hardly ever spend less than an hour on a track. So I mean, you're usually looking at about a 3-hour minimum on a track that's within an hour of your house. So if you just figure up what the fuel is, and for that and 3 hours of your time, most of the time that's not going to be less than about $100. That's just fuel in 3 hours of somebody's time, and that's not an outrageous amount of money as far as your hourly rate or whatever. So I think you should be expecting to pay somewhere around that $100 mark just to get somebody out there, because that's kind of about what their minimum is going to be most of the time. Now there's a lot of guys out there that won't charge anything. And I've done it. I've done a whole bunch of tracks that I didn't charge anything. But the more successful your dog gets, and the more confidence you get in the dog, and the more tracks you start taking, the more it becomes almost impossible for you to be taking them for free. Like if I was taking as many tracks as I go on, if I was doing them for free, I'd be broke. So, I mean, the guys, you should expect for a guy to charge somewhere in that range. And then the longer he's there, most guys that are fair are going to tell you, hey man, I'll keep tracking if you want me to, but this isn't looking good. And, the longer I'm out here, most of them aren't going to try to just rack up a big bill on you, because they don't want to be out there away from their family any longer than they have to be for a deer that they're not going to recover. So I would just say, if you're going to call a tracker, probably should have some references of, talk to some people that they've tracked for, and make sure they're not just, trying to get money out of you. Because I've heard horror stories of some guys that are, they don't have they're just doing it to make money, and they're, maybe they don't have a dog that's even capable of recovering a deer, and they'll come out there and just track and then give you a bill and say, oh, he wasn't dead or whatever, So have some references. You might ask, to see some pictures of the dog in some recoveries, or or they may ask you for some references of some phone numbers that you can give to people that you have recovered deer for, so they can talk to them. And those aren't bad questions to ask. I've had people ask me that, and I can send them, people to talk to or pictures or whatever they want, and I don't think any tracker that's, doing it for the right reasons is going to mind if you ask them those types of questions. But I think you should, as a hunter, calling somebody out there, they should be expecting to be given some kind of compensation for their time and their efforts, because there's a lot of work that goes into training one, and there's a lot of time away from your family, and a lot of those calls, come in at the most inopportune times when you're doing something that, your family doesn't want you to leave and go to or whatever. So I think everybody should, kind of be expecting to give some sort of compensation. And most people are. Usually whatever I charge, a lot of times people give me more than what I'm asking for. I might say, hey man, if you'll just give me $60 to cover my fuel or whatever, then we'll call it good, and they'll pay me $100, or whatever. So most people are good about it.
What you got any advice for someone who wanted to potentially become a blood tracker?
Yeah, I would say, I wouldn't try to turn anybody away from it. It's a lot of fun. You can learn a lot about dogs, and you can, learn a lot of things that make you a better handler and a better trainer from it. And there's a lot of need for it, and like I started off with, it's fairly easy to train one. I wouldn't, want anybody to be discouraged thinking that it's, too difficult to train one. I mean, it's one of the easier things to train. It comes natural to dogs, and it's not even really breed specific. I mean, you can have a house dog that can do it. I mean, it doesn't depend on their age. Even if your dog's a little older and you want him to have some sort of a job, try it. Find out what drives your dog, if it's food or if it's playing tug or a ball or whatever. And like I talked about earlier, put something at the beginning, middle, and end of that track, and start off easy and progressively get harder, and reward them at the end with whatever drives them. But I'd say any breed, any age dog can do it, and there's going to be some that won't, but for the most part, just about any dog can do it. It's a great job for a dog that that doesn't have a job at all. If it's not a hunting dog, it's just a house dog or a cow dog or whatever. Just about any dog can do it.
Well, Lane, we've been at this for a little over an hour now, so I think we're gonna get her wrapped up. But man, a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of really good information. Once again, I want to thank you. And where can you mention your TikTok and stuff like that? Where all can people find you to follow you at?
I'm on Facebook. It's just Lane Williams, and then I've got it's Oak Fuskee Outdoors on TikTok and on YouTube. That's OKFUSKEE Outdoors, and again, that's the county where I'm from, and that's the TikTok channel and everything. So they can find me and follow me there.
All right. Well, everybody listening, thank you for coming and listening to us today.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me.
I just want to give everyone that's listening a sincere thank you. Getting this podcast going has been a project. I really hope you're enjoying it, and if you don't mind, give the show a good rating and review wherever you're listening to it at, or share it on your social media to help get some traction. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to your feedback.